All right, hi everyone. I'm Ray Paprocki, publisher of Dispatch Magazines, which includes Columbus CEO. Welcome to Diverse Leaders in Law. It's our quarterly webinar by Columbus CEO. It's in partnership with Barnes and Thornburg and Frost Brown Todd, and I want to thank each of them for their support for this ongoing discussion. Today's forum is entitled LGBTQ+ Update. Life at Work, Civil Rights and Legal Landscape in Ohio. And now I'd like to introduce Sam Quimby of Frost Brown Todd. Sam?
Thanks, Ray, and good afternoon to everyone who has joined us today. I'm excited to be here as a representative of Frost Brown Todd, supporting the second year of this important series in partnership with Columbus CEO. The value of both diversity and inclusion have long been fixtures of Frost Brown Todd's culture, and it remains core to who we are today. The topic of today's panel is one that I am personally passionate about, and I'm quite proud to share the initiatives Frost Brown Todd has taken to support and celebrate its LGBT colleagues this year. For instance, we added the option to have preferred pronouns to employees' Outlook signature blocks and directory listings. We participated in the LGBT Bar Association's Lavender Law Conference and Career Fair. In my view, an important mission to ensure that LGBT law students know that there are corporate law firms within their hometown footprints that are safe places for them to come back to and work and thrive. Once again, for Pride Month, we went beyond just attending local Pride festivities and actually engaged in dialogue about the LGBT movement itself. We held screenings and Q&A with the filmmakers of Cured, a documentary about the LGBT community's successful campaign to have homosexuality removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. There are other examples I could share with you, and perhaps some of those will come up during our panel discussion. All of that said, we recognize that our work is never finished. We are constantly developing and refining our approach to create a more vibrant law firm for our colleagues, our clients, and our communities. Frost Brown Todd appreciates the collaboration here and looks forward to additional important and engaging topics in our series this year and beyond. Ray, back to you.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to Frost Brown Todd. Now let's turn things over to Katy Smith, editor of Columbus CEO and the business editor for the Columbus Dispatch. Katy.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. We have a great panel today of 4 legal leaders, including Alana Jochum, Executive Director of Equality Ohio, Angela Phelps-White, Executive Director of the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, Brian Jarman, a partner at Barnes and Thornburg, and Sam Quimby, who you just met, a member at Frost Brown Todd. We're going to kick off the conversation here. I want to invite everyone to post questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll address them possibly during the presentation, but also we'll have a little space at the end to devote to the questions. Let's start with talking about the legal landscape for LGBTQ Ohioans. Some things have changed recently. It's become, there's a lot of, I think, overlap with state and federal law. I know it's not easy to interpret, and so that's why we've brought people like Angela and Alana here to tell us about that. So we'll start with Angela. Talk to us about what's changed recently with regard to those laws and what the role of the Civil Rights Commission is.
Thank you, Katy. First of all, thank you for inviting the commission to be represented on this panel today. We always like to seize opportunities to explain the work that we do at the commission. First, by way of background, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission is a statutorily created agency. Our authority is conferred by Ohio Revised Code 4112. We are a neutral agency, and we investigate cases of alleged discrimination against those protected classes set forth in Ohio Revised Code 411202, which are the same protected classes as set forth in Title VII. Our mission is to promote positive human relations amongst Ohio's diverse population through education and enforcement of Ohio's anti-discrimination laws. With that said, with respect to today's topic, there was a big win for the LGBTQ+ community in June of 2020, when the United States Supreme Court issued its decision in the case of Bostock versus Clayton County. In that case, the Supreme Court included sexual orientation and gender identity within the definition of sex as set forth in Title VII. The court held that it would be an unlawful discriminatory practice for an employer to discriminate against a person on the basis of sexual orientation and/or gender identity. Now, this is significant, especially with respect to what we do at the commission. Prior to this decision, the commission could not investigate employment cases where the alleged basis of discrimination was determined to be sexual orientation and gender identity, because it was determined that sexual orientation and gender identity were not protected under Title VII. However, when we did do investigations in these cases, we could do it if the basis of discrimination fell within the realm of gender stereotyping. And that is where a person was discriminated against because their appearance or behavior was not within the perceived behavior and appearance of that of a man or a woman. So we used a broad scope of that gender stereotyping category to investigate our cases. As a side note, just so that the people attending would know, when we did come across cases that were where the alleged basis of discrimination was sexual orientation and gender identity, we did not dismiss those cases, even though we didn't have jurisdiction to investigate them and to render administrative remedy. We had an agreement with the EEOC that when we came across those employment cases, we would give those cases back to the EEOC for them to further handle those cases to avoid any dismissals. However, with the Bostock decision, they have included sexual orientation and gender identity within the class definition of sex. So now we have the ability to investigate employment cases even where sexual orientation and gender identity are the alleged basis for discrimination in the workplace. But it's also spanned even further from employment cases. We also are federal partners with HUD, and they have instituted the same principles set forth in Bostock within housing matters. So we are now also investigating housing cases as well as public accommodation cases, education and credit cases, where with that broadened definition of sex pursuant to Title VII. When it comes to the enforcement, we enforce the Title VII protections through Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4112. We also use federal law as a guidance, especially where the state is silent. So while some jurisdictions within Ohio have adopted portions of the Bostock holding in their ordinance, the state of Ohio has not. However, the Ohio Fairness Act has been proposed, but to date has not been enacted into law. But the broadened definition of the protected class of sex, the commission is now able to conduct thorough investigations based upon sexual orientation as well as gender identity. Basically, this legal landscape is still evolving, and the commission is monitoring these cases very closely throughout this evolution.
Thank you. Angela, could you tell us how can someone navigate approaching your agency with a complaint?
You can file a complaint either by phone. We have online applications that you can fill out, and you can do it by fax. We are currently not taking in-person charges. People can come into the agency and file them in person. We're currently not doing that in light of the current pandemic. So basically, you would call us. You can go to our website. You can call us. You can call any of our 5 regions. We have regions in Columbus, offices in Columbus, Toledo, Akron, Cleveland, Dayton, and there's a satellite office in the Cincinnati area. Contact us. We will either help you fill out the form or you can go online and get the form. Once these cases are filed, they are assigned to an investigator. The investigator will then reach out to whoever files the case, and the case will proceed from there. And they will explain the process on how we gather the information. We conduct interviews, we secure documentation, and then the investigator will make a recommendation to the commission as to whether it's probable cause or not. If it's probable cause, we try to work out these cases through conciliation. Prior to that, however, we do engage in mediation. Then the matter will then go to an ALJ for hearing. Now, I will say this has changed a little bit because we've had the House Bill 352, where all employment cases come through us. So it's changed in terms of how we do intake because of the pronouncements of 352, where all state discrimination cases with respect to employment will come through our agency. So that's pretty much how it is. Just contact us. I think you were given the name and contact information to put up on chat so that people can reach out to the commission. You can, if you're not sure, you can also reach out for questions and we'll be more than glad to assist you through that process.
Great. And with that, I think it's a natural time to transition to Alana to talk about what's going on in the state legislature right now and tell us about Equality Ohio and the work that you're doing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Katie. And it is such an honor to be a part of this esteemed panel and with everybody here today, talking about this really important, timely, and as Director Phelps-White said, evolving topic. We really are watching history unfold before our eyes in terms of the legal protections for LGBTQ folks. Equality Ohio is the statewide LGBTQ education and advocacy organization. We seek to essentially change hearts, minds, and laws as shorthand for what we do. And I'm going to put our website here in the chat. We've been around for over 16 years, and we were really born out of the time when Ohio enshrined discrimination in our Constitution by defining marriage as between one man and one woman. We said never again will the LGBTQ community in Ohio be powerless. And even though we were born out of that issue of marriage equality, we have fought from day one for these very basic, fundamental non-discrimination protections that we are finally starting to see elements of be put in place. We really applaud the Bostock decision. It was tremendous to see in print from a conservative justice that yes, sex does include sexual orientation and gender identity, something we fought as an argument for many years. And it was limited in its scope and will take some time to spread more clearly throughout the case law. So it does still it still creates urgency around the Ohio Fairness Act, as Director Phelps-White said. We still need the Ohio Fairness Act at the state level, and we still need the Equality Act at the federal level. Those two pieces of legislation will make clear once and for all that LGBTQ folks are protected in housing, employment, public accommodations, credit, jury services, all the areas that folks just naturally move about in their daily lives. As part of that advocacy that Equality Ohio leads towards achieving those goals, we have helped many municipalities make their own areas affirming and welcoming for LGBTQ folks. We're really proud to share that about 34 municipalities and one county have advocated for local non-discrimination protections. So they spell out essentially what the Ohio Fairness Act would do at the state level, but at the local level, and have created zones of protection. I think the problem with that long-term, we have 422 distinct municipalities and localities across the state. We can't have that patchwork of protections. You literally can lose your civil rights or have them strengthened or lessened on your daily commute based on where you live and where you work. We need one unified, clear law across the state. The Ohio Fairness Act will do that. And I saw a question in the chat. What is the prospect of that this General Assembly? We're very encouraged in that it has been introduced in some form or fashion for over 10 years. But this session, it was introduced with the most bipartisan support that we have ever seen on it in both the House and the Senate. Although we have been dismayed at some of the different legislation that our legislators have taken up recently, we've actually, over our education over the past several General Assemblies, seen a steady drumbeat of increased support and understanding of our LGBTQ community. These protections are not just the right thing to do, the moral thing to do. They actually are important to Ohio's economy. Business leaders like those who are on this call, you see this as you are trying to attract and retain talent. How effective is your policy as a company protecting your LGBTQ employees. If the future employee you want to secure Google's Ohio LGBT and sees us not as an affirming state, you can't change the housing laws in your suburbs where your employees are going to live. You can't change the public accommodation laws there. We really need unified laws so that you can attract and retain your LGBTQ families and have a thriving economy. So I want to also share that a key part that has been transformative in our conversations with legislators and overall has been Ohio Business Competes. I put the link of that in the chat. This is a list of more than 1,150 businesses of every size and shape, every jurisdiction in Ohio saying, we want unified statewide non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ folks because they're good for the business of our state and they're good for us as companies. And I invite folks, take a look at that. If your logo's not on there yet, it's so easy to join. We really welcome you being part of this voice for supporting your employees and their families in every area of their lives. The last thing I want to say is just thank you to the EEOC and to the OCRC. You as civil rights agencies have really kept your pulse on the federal case law, and when cases like Bostock come out, have been willing to incorporate that analysis in. Really helpful first step in expanding these access to some justice for folks. Does it solve everything? No. OCRC is not our court system. Without the Basic Fairness Act or Equality Act, our courts are still really kept off limits to LGBTQ folks as an area of redress. So yes, it's murky, it's evolving, and we need these two pieces of legislation in order to finally have folks not lose their civil rights on their commute in the morning.
Thank you, Alana. Being out at work, I think we've come a long way since 10 years ago, since 20 years ago. And I'd love to hear from Brian and Sam some personal stories that you shared in our conversation 2 days ago.
Sure, Brian, you want me to go ahead? Okay. Gosh, where do I start, right? For me, I was out before coming into the legal field. I've been out since I was a teenager, and being out. So it's always kind of a question of being intentional about who it is that you're discussing your personal life with. I know we talked about the concept of coming out every day, right? Coming out every time you meet somebody new, every time you engage with a new client, every time you're meetings, just having a meeting with someone for the first time. And I have to remember, and I try to remember often and remind myself that I don't have to do this alone, because I get to stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I get to stand on people who have paved a path that I wouldn't be able to be here without those efforts. That you talk about the Stonewall riots, right? You talk about the Harvey Milk, in his efforts in California years ago, and overturning the referendums that were happening there. And I think, and part of that it's reminding myself to be brave. It's reminding myself that if I don't see anybody around me who's like me, maybe that's because I have to be the person for somebody else, for somebody else to see that you can be successful as a out lesbian in the legal field, especially in a corporate firm. I mean, and when I was in law school, I didn't really see a lot of those, of people like me. And I'm always reminded of the story when I was in law school, and I was doing well, and I had a lot of opportunities to have these on-campus interviews. And a colleague looked at me and said, "What are you going to wear?" I hadn't a clue. And so it was at that point that I realized that I owe a lot of gratitude to two specific movements, not just the LGBT movement, but also the gender equality movement. Because if it was not for pantsuits, I would not be a lawyer today. That's somewhat, that's a funny thing, but it's the God honest truth. I mean, I have to be authentic, and I need to be able to bring my full self to the table. It benefits the client, it benefits the firm, it benefits my family, it benefits myself. And so, you know, removing issues of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to wear? What's okay to wear? That allows me to get out of myself and be the best Sam Quimby that I can be. So I don't want to take all the time because I know Brian has some good stories too, but and there's others that I might be able to share. But I'll pass it off to Brian now.
Sure, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so I joined the law firm world roughly around 2008 while I was in law school, and chose not to come out for a long period of time. And as I expressed with the group when we were preparing, much of that has to do not with the firm or the culture. It has to do with kind of getting comfortable with yourself, and that process takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of courage, maybe a lot of courage. But it's also about bringing all aspects of life together. So it's the personal life, that's the family life, the friends life, the work life. They can all live in distinct separate lanes at times, I think, as you're going through that process. And that's the real challenge, was trying to get them all to sync up, I think, and be comfortable that they were all ready to sync up. But in doing that, I'm going to echo a theme that Sam did, which was there are people who have gone before here in our firm, here in other places, that blazed that trail long before me. And that trail was very thorny, very dense, and very unwelcoming. And they blazed it well. And it's only because of their effort that I was able to go down that path. And so now I think about living, work, having an authentic life, being married to my partner since July 11th, 2020 of last year, being a new development, something that we weren't sure was happening when we started to date. Those are all amazing things, but that then leaves the sense and the obligation of tending the trail and keeping that trail wide and free of the obstacles, and trying to make it a little smoother and a little flatter and a little easier for the next person to come down. Because I identify as bisexual, and so in some ways that through this period has given me the opportunity to pass a little easier in conversations, pass a little easier in interactions, and it's taken some work and some therapy to try to say, it is what it is. It's only what we do going forward that's important. And that is being visible and trying to help others come down that path and have it be easier than it was for me, which was infinitely easier than it was for those who came down it before, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s. So.
If I may add just one point, I cannot overstate the importance of allies, especially in the legal community. I was given a wonderful opportunity to work with, at Frost Brown Todd in the Columbus office, and just having the allies around me. Okay, maybe I was the only out person at that office at the time, but I had an enormous army of allies around me, and people who gave me a place where I felt safe, like the safe space to be who I am and to not have to worry about whether or not my status as a gay woman was going to interfere with my progress and development as an attorney. So allies cannot be overstated. So.
And there was a question that just came in, Sam, that I think is really relevant to this. It's talking about difficulties in legislating morality or changing hearts and minds, so to speak, and how do we work through that? And to me, I think the obvious answer, but a difficult one, is you have to have representation. The people who are underrepresented must have places at the table. They have to be there, and they have to be speaking and have to be heard. And so once that happens, one, you get more people following, so there are more voices in the chorus. But I think then the other piece is that they become, and I talked about this when I wrote about coming out to the law firm in one of our pride pieces, was that I grew up in a rural community in Indiana where I didn't really know another person in the LGBTQ community. And for many people, I think, who struggled with that, had much to do with lack of interaction, lack of drawing near to people, hearing their stories, feeling their pains. And I think as we have more representation, more people who are in power, who have that power to share their stories, I think that's how you start to change minds, and start to help people wrestle with some of these issues of morality a little more personally rather than abstractly.
So you go through, this kind of continual coming out with every new person you meet, every new situation you navigate. And one of those situations obviously is who your employer is. And another also is who the clients are that you're interacting with. Talk to us about those challenges and also about what organizations can do to support making that all flow, giving people the ability to be 100% themselves everywhere.
I'll relate even a situation I had a few years ago. Being in Columbus and being in the community in Columbus, you can often forget that as soon as you get outside the city or maybe to a more rural area or maybe somewhere a little bit more southern than Ohio, things aren't necessarily the same. The culture may not be the same, and it may not be as welcoming. And of course, you have people who have their own views of this issue and look at it as a morality issue. And so, I had a situation about 5 years ago, meeting with the new GC of a client and traveling down to one of our southern offices to meet with this the new GC. And I'm talking to him, a trademark lawyer. I've been managing the portfolio of this company for a number of years, talking to him about legal issues, what I see, where some gaps are, where what advice, recommendations I have for going forward. And I'm talking, and I always talk with my hands, and I have my wedding band on. And he walked in and saw that, and then the whole demeanor changed, and the whole room changed. And I had forgotten how small I could feel in a given moment like that. It was unnerving to an extent. And what do you do? I mean, I had to just keep going forward. Right? I'm the lawyer advising on trademark issues in the portfolio, and so I had to keep moving. But it made me stumble a bit, and it was somewhat again, I can't overstate how it made me feel small. So it's it is always in the back of my mind. How is the new person I'm meeting, whether it be the client or another lawyer, how are they going to react? And it's something, I have to be honest, sometimes it's exhausting. It literally is exhausting at times. But what else is there for me to do? I have to keep going through that path. So I'll turn it over to Brian for his comment.
Brian, you're muted.
The darn mute button. Saw that on Shark Tank the other day, and now I'm beginning to think it's a good idea. So I haven't had that exact same experience, but I certainly can empathize and sympathize with this idea of fear and worry about, as you talk about what you did during your life, during your weekend, during your evening, just like any other person would, about how will this person respond to that? Do they have hidden biases that they're going to express by moving a matter, moving an engagement, and worries that those will be stumbling blocks. We talked a little bit during our previous discussion about how I think as we become larger national organizations, our corporate clients, and Sam mentioned this previously, so it really goes to her point, was that our corporate clients in a lot of ways have provided leadership that have taken a relatively conservative profession like the legal profession and helped us move or be pulled towards looking at things differently, being exposed to different ways of thinking, particularly with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think that's been very helpful. In the same vein, I think we're going to be challenged to start talking about, if we believe these things are important, we would like to have clients that think these things are important. And so looking for opportunities to partner with those clients, partner with those people or even, to borrow that phrase, to be allies with those clients is a real opportunity, and I think a real blessing when that can happen. And so the second part of your question was, how do you start to provide an environment where these things can be dealt with? I think creating resource groups for your employees, where you have prominent leaders who identify or are allies with those, support those groups, like we have, and I'm sure Frost Brown Todd does. I'm co-chair of BT Pride, which is our talent resource group for the LGBTQ plus community. Looking for opportunities to engage with clients, involve them in those activities. If you've got clients who don't have an employee resource group, invite them to be part of your Pride activities. There's innumerable ways to broaden that community and grow the pie of accessibility and inclusion.
And if I could just add, I appreciate the question of legislation doesn't solve everything. We know that, and we know that the law is evolving in the right direction, but sometimes laws have ebbs and flows. As business leaders, as companies, you know the right answer because you care about your employees and you want to support your employees to be able to bring their whole self to work. You want to avoid the situations that Samantha and Brian shared as much as possible, because if not just for the fact that that's the right and humane thing to do, it also interferes with your work and your bottom line. So I think that that's where companies can really have a role in, yeah, the law is the law, and we're definitely going to try to make the baseline of that and advocate that the law be changed, but you can work to try to create the most inclusive place possible and the most affirming place possible. And so I want to also drop a couple resources in the chat that I think have been particularly helpful that we have directed folks to. Out and Equal is a great resource for supporting businesses in this journey. Specific to Ohio, there is an LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce called Plexus. They have recently extended into the Columbus area and have been in Northeast Ohio for a very long time. Wonderful resource and community, great group to be a part of to show your employees that affirmation and get access to resources. And then, you know, we also talked a little bit about it's a journey and there's things to learn. So continuously investing in training for your senior leadership, for your employees, for onboarding. We offer at Equality Ohio Chroma Consulting, which is a great way to talk about LGBTQ issues, how you can update your policies and really do so in an intersectional way with other identities and other ERG groups that may be part of your company. So I do think that you have a wonderful opportunity to lead in this space, to show why the law should be what it is by building the business case for supporting your employees even before the law requires you.
If I may add to that, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission offers training for implicit bias. We're currently working on a program regarding mythbusters and stereotyping. And we also have training on the laws and the state of the laws in Ohio and the evolution there as well. So we offer that free. So we are always willing to provide training in that area for the employers as well.
And I'm putting your link to your training requests for everybody, Director Phelps-White.
What about people who don't work for large organizations, attorneys who are maybe in private practice, or maybe they work for a small company that doesn't offer support and resources on these topics? What can they do?
Yeah, so I think a couple of opportunities is, to the extent if you're in-house, so you're working for a corporation as an attorney, I think, you know, begin to leverage your outside counsel for engagement and opportunities. So, you know, lean on Sam, lean on me, lean on Bill, you know, any others to say, hey, we're looking to do X, Y, and Z with respect to our efforts. How can you guys help? How can you guys be a partner? How can you engage with us? I frankly love those types of opportunities. They're because they're few and far between. But lean on them. We have innumerable resources, and we're happy to share those with clients or potential clients, and to do that. The other is to engage with your local LGBTQ bar or LGBTQ group within your local Chamber of Commerce, like Plexus there. Those are other opportunities to engage with LGBTQ plus individuals and support groups.
All right, it looks like we have had some questions come through in the chat here. Have our panelists had a chance to look at those, and does anyone want to address any of them?
Yeah, so the question I think related to, have I had to handle situations where religion's been brought up as some sort of challenge to who I am, or the way I live my life? Not in the workplace. I've had it happen certainly outside of the workplace, certainly amongst family, friends, and I think the thing you deal with more in the workplace is on the terms of old statements, old, outdated modes of thinking. I don't want to use the term microaggressions because they're not really in that vein, but it's more just slights. People assuming that your spouse is one gender versus another, but nothing blatant. And I think that just has a huge bit of me coming through in the 2000s, coming out as it does to any time prior to that.
Yeah, the situation's the same for me. I mean, in the workplace, I think, for the most part, religion is kept out of the conversation, especially in a law firm, legal, kind of the professional setting. But certainly, I've had to deal with it in other non-professional settings. And I do remember, losing a friend not so long ago because it suddenly dawned on me when he made the comment that he accepted me because we all live in sin. And so it was just kind of one of those things that just kind of shocked me a bit. And, it altered the status and the trajectory of our relationship at that point. But yeah, I have not had to deal with that in the workplace. I mean, I agree with Brian, though, on the kind of the outdated modes of thought and thinking and the assumptions that are made about, me being a female and therefore I must have a husband. Though I think in my case, most people presume that that I may be a gay woman. But in any event, thankfully, haven't had to deal with it in the workplace.
I do think the challenges, though, that come from some of those slips of the tongue or the habits that are part of that are, at least for me, have sometimes been a good reminder of my own biases, implicit biases that I have. Happened probably a couple of years ago. I was talking to a colleague who was doing a deposition of an expert, and I said, "Well, I hope your deposition goes well with your expert." And I referred to the expert as a male, and she said, my colleague said, "Well, it's a woman," and I was just like, "You have clearly caught me with an implicit bias here, and thank you for sharing that, because it does need to be checked." And I think that's the opportunity, is for all of us as we continue to go through those assumptions, is just to offer a branch of, I don't think you're meaning anything, and here's an opportunity to do something that's better.
And I also like to undo one other assumption that sometimes happens. Some would try to pit religion against LGBTQ folks, and the two are not mutually exclusive in any way. There are so many people of faith leaders and religious traditions that fully embrace and welcome LGBTQ congregants, religious leaders. It really is a faith by faith situation, sect by sect, sometimes down to temple or church or mosque by place of worship. And so we also try to dispel any assumptions that could happen there. I think there are more and more faithful folks growing, embracing, and reaching out to support LGBTQ equality than ever before.
And I would also say that I think when, should that happen, or if that happens, that's where training towards being an ally, being engaged in this conversation for everyone is important, because that gives the opportunity for someone of the same religion, someone of the same perspective to speak up and say, that's not how we talk about this here. We respect people. We respect their differences, and challenging them in this way is not appropriate. And so I think it's an opportunity for allies to be engaged in that conversation.
What considerations are there for transgender people in navigating the workplace, the legislative landscape?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. The Bostock decision was very clear in that sexual orientation and gender identity are both going to be protected under sex. Bostock was specific to employment at the federal level, but we are seeing that interpretation be adopted by Eeoc in other areas and OCRC in other areas. And I think that's because it is hard to ever envision that sex could be interpreted differently in those other contexts. So I definitely think that's the natural trajectory of how it should be. Baseline fundamental protections. You can't talk about sex without inherently including someone's gender identity. That said, we are seeing right now legislatively a strong national and coordinated backlash that is taking direct aim at our transgender community and specifically our most vulnerable of transgender youth. I am appalled at some of the legislation that has been introduced in Ohio and elsewhere. Most recently, in just the last couple months, HB 454 would seek to ban all affirming care, including social workers and counselors, for any young people exploring their gender identity or transgender youth or non-binary youth. And another bill, HB 61 and SB 132, would try to prohibit our transgender youth from playing sports. And that's going directly against the guidance that the Ohio High School Athletic Association and NCAA have had in place for more than a decade, that has been operating to support transgender folks in playing sports and all players, keeping a fair playing field for all players. These are political tactics. These are in my observation, they are political points trying to be scored on the backs of our most vulnerable young people, and they are horrible. And we need to fight them seriously because they have actually passed. Arkansas, one of these laws that would attack the care of our transgender youth did pass and become law. A judge immediately ruled it unconstitutional. However, we have some push for those here in Ohio, and I strongly encourage folks, please join our website, get our emails for how you can be part of pushing back and protecting our kids when legislation like this gets momentum.
I think the path I was talking about earlier and trying to tend to it and widen it and make it a little smoother and easier. In my mind, transgender challenges is really one of the areas I think about prominently with respect to that path. When I attended Lavender Law, that's now been 3 years ago, they gave a statistic that I think it was no capital partner in a national law firm was transgender, and that kind of blew my mind. And I don't know if hopefully that statistic has now changed, but I'm not aware that it's changed. I think that's the type of path widening we have yet to really do, is to make that a path that is straightforward and possible, or more possible than it is today. That is that is an emerging tough field, and we have much work to do there.
And visibility will help. One key thing that you can all be doing as you take away from today, support your transgender colleagues. You may not know that you know someone who's transgender. That's okay, but you probably do actually. When someone who is transgender comes out to you, that is really an invitation in that they trust you enough to share that aspect of themselves with you. I see a question that was posted about the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Excellent question. I'm proud that our Ohio Chamber of Commerce has weighed in and supports the Ohio Fairness Act and has pushed back against these harmful pieces of legislation because there are real economic ramifications. Sporting events have already started saying they won't be placing here in Ohio if the sports bills come through. Destination Cleveland issued a statement after the medical conscience clause. This was a clause that got tucked into our budget at the very last minute. truly bypassing the democratic process that said that medical providers could opt out of services that they disagree with, just flat out. We know that that will disproportionately harm LGBTQ folks, but Destination Cleveland has already seen some entities citing that as why they won't place their events here. So there really is economic harm here, and that is actually how we can all stand up against these attacks that are happening to our community.
And our wonderful freelance writer, Laura Newpoff, wrote about this and how LGBTQ rights are a business issue in one of our recent issues of Columbus CEO. So I just posted a link to that in the chat.
There was a question a little bit ago related to DEI leadership, and do more companies need more leadership? I think more companies, more law firms in particular, need more diverse leadership. They need people from underrepresented groups in positions of leadership. I don't think there's any harm in having people who study it, people who that's their job, but ultimately we need people with those lived life experiences, bringing them to the places of power and using that perspective and that power that they have to lead the change, to be the change. I think it's, while we'll always have to have allies at the table, they'll always have a place, they'll always be here. We ultimately need more people, underrepresented people in those positions of leadership.
Absolutely. And I mean, we talked about this earlier, Brian, you know, clients are more, they're demanding that. They want to see who, you know, it used to be, okay, show me your diversity and inclusion policy. Now it's show me your numbers and you know, who's working on my file, who's in leadership roles, what is the makeup. So, I mean, business is really pulling us in the right, you know, as a law firm is in the right direction. But you know, I think we're going to need to see more visibility of underrepresented folks in leadership positions, just as a business matter. It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, and there's always going to be work to be done, whether that's law firms or corporations. I think the statistics on, and I think this is not LGBTQ plus individuals, but just women on boards, corporate boards, women in CEO positions, women as managing partners. I think they're all vastly underrepresented compared to where the population and where they are in the corporate, you know, numbers of corporation. Tremendous opportunity yet to still be obtained with respect to those groups, just as one metric.
And one thing I wanted to touch on the trans question that we talked about earlier, I would encourage firms or businesses to take a peek at the HRC Corporate Quality Index, see how you rate on that, and because HRC really does a good job of putting you to the test as a business, as a corporation, as a law firm. You know, what are you doing? And so, yes, visibility matters. Yes, we have a long way to go, and I agree, Brian, that trail does. I mean, that's the new trail is set with transgender rights. But I do think having policies in place helps to encourage people to be visible and feel safer to be out and be visible. So they kind of go hand in hand. But I would recommend taking a look at the HRC Corporate Quality Index.
Yeah, and there was a comment from, and I'm sorry if anybody else on the panel, feel free to jump in, from Bill about, you know, the dollars and cents arguments are and data is replete, but people need real life experience and understanding how having diverse perspectives leads to better outcomes. And I think it's until they get more engagement with it, it's going to be hard to understand it. One of the groups I work with here on their board, we hired a Hispanic treatment coordinator for HIV, and we saw engagement in the Hispanic testing area grow by 6 times. And it's merely because we now had someone who could identify and share their experience with the community and begin to engage with that community in the way that that community needed to be engaged with, not how we outsiders thought the community needed to be engaged with. that's the breakthrough people have to get to. They have to understand that.
Well, everyone, thank you. This has been a great discussion. I want to throw it now for a final question to Bill Nolan, managing partner of our sponsor, Barnes and Thornburg.
All right, thanks, Katie, and thanks folks for joining, and thank the panelists for your leadership and comments. Sam had mentioned allies early on, and that word was used various times along the way. So I guess we ask each of the panelists from your different perspectives. If you have someone attending who's sort of a relatively inexperienced ally, right? Not someone who's been doing this for a long time, because I think those are important people to get on board. What's one positive thing you would tell them to walk away with today that they can do to move one or another of these balls forward?
I would say that the key word you used there to me was somewhat new. And I think if you take that lens, what I would recommend them to do is to find someone in the LGBTQ plus community who is a leader, who is comfortable talking about their story, and take them to lunch and learn from them, and see what I would say is draw close to them and learn about their experience, and then let that influence how you take action from their experience.
And I would say there is a plethora to do. There is so much that we can do right now. Sadly, we are fighting on many fronts, both to prevent bad law from forming and to advance and codify baseline protections still. Again, the easiest one, I'm going to put it in the chat. If every person had their company join Ohio Business Competes, someone in the comments commented about the economic argument being so imperative to our legislators understanding this, not just as the right thing to do, but the right thing for Ohio economically to do. Ohio Business Competes has been so effective in that. Please join that. Please join Equality Ohio's list. We are right here. We are your statewide entity. There are lots of wonderful national partners, but we're right here on the ground in Ohio, and we want to help you. And I would also offer, there is no question that is stupid except the one unasked, but you can ask us it instead of putting it on an LGBTQ person to have to somehow identify, defend their identity or defend their existence. We are happy to do that educational work as the organization. So again, I'll put our Equality Ohio chat in the chat for everybody to reach out to us.
From the standpoint,
I would add, I'm sorry, no, go ahead, Angela.
from the standpoint of the commission, just help people to understand there is a third-party entity out there that's neutral. We take the information, we investigate it, and we do whatever we can to promote positive human relations everywhere. So to the extent listening to the stories that I've heard here today, it highlights the important work that we do, that we are there to help the aggrieved. So help someone to understand that there is an entity out there that's willing to look into their situation and to assist them in that endeavor to the best that our statutory authority will allow us to do. Back to you, Sam. Sorry.
Okay, Angela, thank you. I would add show up. And what I mean by that is, if there's a young associate in your office who is going to a Pride event, go with them. The events that are hosted by Equality Ohio, by HRC, by Stonewall, those are not just for LGBTQ plus people. Those are also for allies. And it is an amazing, what that has done for me when I've had allies, show up with me or go with me to these events, that you don't even have to do anything except show up sometimes for the people. So I would encourage, if you're sponsoring any event, go ahead and go, see what it's like. A lot of them are really fun. So.
All right, excellent, thank you. Those are four very different perspectives and answers, but very, very easy to grasp and act on each one of those. So with that, Ray Paprocki, publisher of Columbus CEO.
Great, thank you, everyone. Bill, thanks. Brian and Sam in particular, thank you for sharing your stories. The rest of the panelists for sharing the insights that we need. Great questions. It was great to see so much activity in the chat section. And again, thank you to Katy, Barnes and Thornburg, Frost Brown, Todd for the support for this ongoing webinar. We hope you found this forum informative. You can also read a story about what we discussed today in the December issue of Columbus CEO. And one last thing, if I could, if you, we're going through a process of renewing all of our CEO subscribers. If you are a current subscriber, please go to columbusceo.com, hit the subscribe button and fill out your info so you can stay attuned to what's happening in the business community in Columbus. And if you're not a subscriber, do the same thing. So on behalf of everybody here, I just want to say thank you and take care. And for those of us who it's relevant, we've learned how to be better allies today. So thank you.